I'm Jason, 73 years old, retired corporate VP with 35 years at Fortune 500 companies. I thought I had retirement mastered with perfect savings, dream plans, and an early exit strategy. Then June 2nd, 2009 changed everything I believed about what retirement really means. What I discovered nearly destroyed me, but ultimately saved my life. I was 45 when I first started seriously planning my retirement escape. Back then, I had this crystal clear vision of what my golden years would look like. Golf courses every Tuesday and Thursday morning, travel to Europe with my wife, sleeping in past 6 a.m. for the first time in decades. I thought retirement was going to be one long, well-deserved vacation after grinding through the corporate machine for 35 years. My desk drawer was filled with retirement magazines. I had subscriptions to every financial publication that promised to unlock the secrets of early retirement. Those glossy pages showed me couples walking on beaches, playing tennis, sitting on porches with satisfied smiles. That was going to be me and my wife. I was absolutely certain of it. The magic number that consumed my thoughts was $2 million. I had calculated it down to the penny. 2 million would give me the 4% withdrawal rate the experts recommended, generating $80,000 annually. That seemed like a fortune compared to what my parents had in retirement. This was my ticket to the good life, my ticket to freedom from alarm clocks and board meetings and performance reviews. Every bonus, every raise, every stock option went straight into building this dream. I maxed out my 401k contribution every single year. I opened additional investment accounts and fed them religiously. My financial advisor would smile and nod when we met quarterly, telling me I was ahead of 90% of Americans my age. Those words filled me with pride and confidence that I was doing everything right. But achieving this goal required sacrifices that I convinced myself were temporary. I missed my son's high school basketball games because I was working late on quarterly reports. I skipped family vacations because taking time off might hurt my next promotion. My wife would suggest weekend getaways, and I would counter with spreadsheets showing how that money could compound over 20 years if invested instead. Looking back now, I can see how my wife worried about the stress I was carrying. She would mention my short temper after particularly difficult days at work. She noticed how I would wake up in the middle of the night, mind racing about presentations or deadlines, but I dismissed her concerns as short-sighted thinking. I called it investment in our future. I told her that all this stress and sacrifice would be worth it when we could retire early and live however we wanted. My identity became completely wrapped up in this future version of myself. I was Jason the Successful executive who was smart enough to plan ahead, disciplined enough to save aggressively, and strategic enough to escape corporate life before it completely wore me down. I wore this identity like a badge of honor. Colleagues would ask about my retirement plans, and I would proudly share my timeline and financial milestones. The validation I received from others only strengthened my confidence. My boss would comment on my work ethic and dedication. My brother would express envy about my financial discipline. My financial advisor would use me as an example for other clients who were not saving enough. This external praise fed my belief that I had cracked the retirement code. I became obsessed with retirement success stories in magazines and online forums. I read about people who retired at 55 or 60 and were living their best lives. I studied their strategies and compared their financial situations to mine. Every story reinforced my conviction that money was the key to retirement happiness. If they could do it with less than I was planning to have, then surely I would be even more successful. Ask yourself this question right now. Are you making the same assumptions I made? Are you convinced that reaching a certain financial number will automatically translate into retirement satisfaction? Because here is what nobody told me. In all those magazines and seminars and financial planning sessions, they never mentioned that retirement is not just about having enough money to stop working. They never explained that leaving your career creates an identity crisis that no amount of savings can solve. They never warned me that boredom and purposelessness could be more devastating than financial insecurity. I had spreadsheets for every possible expense in retirement. I had calculated healthcare costs and inflation adjustments and emergency fund requirements. But I had never calculated what it would feel like to wake up every morning with nowhere to go and nothing important to accomplish. I had never budgeted for the emotional cost of losing the structure and relationships and sense of contribution that work provided, even when that work was stressful and demanding. Sound familiar? Because if you are currently in the accumulation phase of retirement planning, focused primarily on building your nest egg, then you are making the same mistake I made. You are assuming that money alone will buy you happiness in retirement. You are planning for the retirement you want instead of preparing for the retirement you will actually experience. The truth is that financial security is just the foundation of retirement, not the entire structure. Without it, retirement is certainly more difficult and stressful. But having it does not guarantee fulfillment or peace or joy. Those things require a completely different kind of preparation that I was too focused on the future to understand. By my early 50s, I had transformed myself into what I considered a retirement expert. I spent hours every week researching withdrawal strategies, tax optimization techniques, and investment allocation models. My home office was filled with retirement planning books, highlighted and bookmarked. I could quote statistics about safe withdrawal rates and healthcare cost projections like a financial advisor. This research became my hobby, my obsession, my second job. I joined online retirement forums where I debated the merits of different investment approaches with strangers across the country. These communities became my validation chambers. When someone posted about their retirement fears or struggles, I would confidently share my research and planning strategies. I genuinely believed that knowledge was power and that my extensive research would protect me from the pitfalls that trapped less prepared retirees. One retirement blogger, in particular, captured my attention and admiration. He had retired at 55 with what he called geographic arbitrage, moving to a lower-cost area, and living off his investments. His blog posts painted picture-perfect scenes of morning coffee on his deck, afternoon hiking, and evening reading by the fireplace. I read every single post he published, studied his financial disclosures, and modeled my own strategy after his success. He became my retirement role model, proof that early retirement was not only possible, but practically guaranteed with proper planning. My accountant would praise my financial discipline during our annual tax preparation meetings. She would tell me that most of her clients were nowhere near as prepared for retirement as I was. My aggressive saving rate and diversified investment portfolio impressed her. These professional endorsements fed my confidence that I was on the right track, that my research-based approach was superior to the haphazard retirement preparation she saw from most people. Every conversation about retirement became an opportunity for me to demonstrate my expertise. When colleagues complained about being behind on their retirement savings, I would launch into detailed explanations about catch-up contributions and Roth conversion strategies. When neighbors mentioned their retirement concerns, I would recommend specific books and websites that had shaped my own understanding. I genuinely thought I was being helpful, but looking back, I was probably insufferable with my know-it-all attitude. The most dangerous part of my research phase was how it reinforced my belief that retirement challenges were simply problems that could be solved with better planning. When I read about retirees struggling with depression or boredom, I dismissed these issues as failures of preparation rather than inevitable aspects of major life transitions. I told myself that people who struggled in retirement simply had not done their homework the way I had done mine. My brother provided a perfect example of what I considered poor retirement. Planning. He had retired from his teaching job at 62 and spent the first year complaining about feeling lost and purposeless. He would call me with stories about sleeping until 10 a.m. and then not knowing what to do with the rest of his day. Instead of recognizing these as legitimate adjustment challenges, I attributed his struggles to his lack of financial preparation and structured planning. I remember telling my wife, that my brother's retirement problems stemmed from not having enough money to pursue interesting activities and not having researched enough ways to stay engaged. I was completely blind to the possibility that his struggles might be normal and that I might face similar challenges regardless of my superior financial position and extensive preparation. My research had taught me about required minimum distributions and Medicare supplement insurance, but it had never addressed the psychological and emotional aspects of retirement transition. The financial websites I frequented focused exclusively on numbers and strategies. The retirement seminars I attended were hosted by investment companies trying to sell products. Nobody was talking about identity loss or relationship changes or the challenge of creating meaning and purpose without a career. I became particularly dismissive of what I called soft retirement concerns. When articles mentioned the importance of social connections or volunteer work or maintaining physical health, I would skim past those sections to get to the financial advice. I thought purpose and relationships and health would naturally take care of themselves once I had solved the money equation. After all, how hard could it be to stay busy and happy when you did not have to work anymore? My neighbor across the street retired around this time and seemed to struggle with the transition. He would stand in his driveway for long periods, looking like he was waiting for something to happen. His wife mentioned to my wife that he was having trouble adjusting to not having anywhere to be during the day. Instead of seeing this as a preview of my own potential experience, I convinced myself that his problems were unique to his situation and his personality. I remember my boss's retirement party during this period. He had worked for the company for 40 years and was universally respected and admired, but at his farewell gathering, he seemed uncertain and almost frightened when people asked about his retirement plans. He kept saying he was not sure what he would do with all his free time. Rather than recognizing this as a red flag about retirement transition, I attributed his uncertainty to his generation's poor retirement planning education. Look inside your own heart right now and ask yourself whether you are making the same mistake I made. Are you so focused on the financial aspects of retirement that you are ignoring everything else? Are you assuming that having enough money will automatically solve all the challenges that come with leaving your career and entering a completely different phase of life? Because I'm telling you this, because hindsight revealed how dangerously narrow my research had been. I had become an expert on retirement financing, but remained completely ignorant about retirement living. I knew everything about managing money in retirement, but nothing about managing myself in retirement. June 2nd, 2009 started like any other Tuesday morning. I arrived at my office at exactly 6:30 a.m., same as I had for the past 15 years. My coffee was still steaming when I sat down at my desk to review the presentation I would be delivering to the board of directors later that morning. This was a crucial quarterly review that could influence my final 2 years before early retirement. Everything was proceeding according to my perfectly crafted timeline. I had been experiencing what I thought was stress-related chest tightness for several weeks leading up to this presentation. My doctor had mentioned during my last physical that my blood pressure was elevated and that I should consider lifestyle changes. But I had dismissed his concerns as overcautious medical advice. I was 58 years old, in reasonably good shape, and just 2 years away from executing my retirement plan. A little workplace stress was not going to derail everything I had worked toward. The presentation materials were spread across my desk when I felt the first real warning sign. A sharp pain shot across my chest, different from the usual tension I experienced during high-pressure periods. My left arm started tingling in a way that made me pause from shuffling through the papers. I remember thinking that I just needed to get through this one meeting, and then I could take a long weekend to decompress. I stood up to gather my materials for the boardroom when the crushing sensation hit me like nothing I had ever experienced. It felt like someone had wrapped a steel band around my chest and was tightening it with every heartbeat. The pain radiated down my left arm and up into my jaw. My vision started to blur around the edges, and I could not catch my breath, no matter how hard I tried. My secretary heard the sound I made when I collapsed against my desk. She found me clutching my chest, unable to speak coherently, with sweat pouring down my face, despite the air conditioning. Her panicked voice, calling 911, seemed to come from very far away, even though she was standing right next to me. I heard her describing my symptoms to the emergency operator while I struggled to understand what was happening to my body. The strangest part about those first few minutes was that my mind kept trying to solve logistical problems instead of processing the medical emergency. I was worried about who would handle my presentation to the board. I was calculating how this disruption might affect my project timeline. Even as my body was shutting down, my brain was still operating in work mode, still focused on maintaining control over my professional responsibilities. The ambulance ride to the hospital passed in fragments of consciousness. The paramedic kept asking me questions about my medical history while attaching various monitors to my body. When he said the words "major cardiac event," something inside me finally understood that this was not just a panic attack or severe indigestion. This was the kind of medical emergency that changed everything, the kind that happened to other people, not to someone with a detailed retirement plan and excellent company health insurance. My first clear thought was not about my life, or my family, or even my health. It was about my retirement timeline. I had calculated everything down to the day, and a heart attack at 58 was not part of the equation. I had assumed perfect health until at least 70, probably longer, given my family history. This medical crisis was going to destroy the careful projections I had built over 13 years of aggressive planning. Waking up in the intensive care unit several hours later was like entering a completely different reality. The machines beeping around my bed, the tubes running from my arms, the concerned faces of my wife and adult children. Everything felt surreal and frightening. My chest ached with every breath, and the medications made my thoughts feel cloudy and disconnected. This was not how I had imagined spending the week of my crucial board presentation. The cardiologist who explained my condition was thorough, but blunt, in a way that shattered my illusions about my health and my future. He showed me the test results that revealed significant damage to my heart muscle. He used terms like lifestyle modification and stress reduction and long-term management that made it clear this was not a minor setback I could overcome with determination and planning. When he recommended immediate retirement due to the stress levels, in my current position, I felt like my entire identity was being erased in a single conversation. Everything I had worked toward, everything I had sacrificed for, everything I had planned was suddenly out of my control. The retirement I had meticulously designed was being forced on me under circumstances I had never considered possible. Lying in that hospital bed with monitors tracking every heartbeat, I realized I had been planning for a retirement that assumed perfect health, unlimited time, and complete control over my circumstances. The heart attack revealed how naive and dangerous those assumptions had been. I was facing early retirement, not as a reward for years of careful planning, but as a medical necessity that arrived without warning or preparation. The fellow patient in the bed next to mine had retired just 6 months earlier, at age 62. He told me he had also suffered his heart attack during what should have been the honeymoon phase of his retirement. We were both discovering that all our financial preparation meant nothing if our bodies could not support the retirement lifestyle we had envisioned. That first night in the cardiac care unit, staring at the ceiling while machines monitored my damaged heart, I began to understand that everything I thought I knew about retirement was wrong. The wake-up call was not just medical, it was existential. My perfect retirement plan had just collided with harsh reality, and nothing would ever be the same. The decision to retire immediately was made for me during a follow-up appointment with my cardiologist 2 weeks after the heart attack. He looked at my test results and spoke with the matter-of-fact tone the doctors use when delivering life-changing news. My heart had sustained significant damage, and returning to the high-stress environment of corporate leadership would likely trigger another cardiac event, possibly fatal. This time, I sat in that sterile medical office, still weak from the hospital. Stay, listening to him, recommend immediate stress reduction and complete lifestyle modification. When I asked about returning to work part-time or in a reduced capacity, he shook his head firmly. The kind of pressure I had thrived on for 35 years was now literally a threat to my survival. My dream of early retirement at 60 had just become a medical mandate at 58. The conversation with my company's HR representative was surreal and uncomfortable. She arrived at my home with disability paperwork and retirement benefit calculations, speaking in the careful, professional tone reserved for delicate situations. My corner office was being packed up by my secretary while I sat in my living room, unable to even visit the workplace that had defined my identity for decades. The early retirement I had planned so meticulously was happening under circumstances I had never imagined possible. My company's disability insurance covered a portion of my salary and my retirement. Accounts were accessible due to medical hardship, but the financial picture was far different from what I had projected. Instead of working 2 more peak earning years, I was suddenly living on reduced income with significantly higher medical expenses. All those careful calculations about my nest egg suddenly seemed inadequate when faced with the reality of prescription costs, specialist visits, and ongoing cardiac monitoring. For the first month after leaving the hospital, I convinced myself that this forced retirement might actually be a blessing in disguise. I'd always complained about work stress and dreamed of having unlimited time to pursue my interests. Now I had that time, and I tried to embrace it as an unexpected gift. I slept late, read books I had been meaning to get to for years, and attempted to enjoy the leisure I had always said I craved. But by the second month, the reality of my situation began to sink in with devastating clarity. The boredom was unlike anything I had experienced in my adult life. I would wake up each morning with absolutely nothing that required my attention or expertise. The phone stopped ringing with urgent business calls. Nobody needed my decisions or input. The sense of importance and purpose that had driven me for decades simply evaporated. My wife was still working full-time, leaving me alone in the house for 8 to 10 hours every day. I had never realized how much of my social interaction had come through work relationships. Without the daily meetings, hallway conversations, and project collaborations, I felt increasingly isolated and disconnected from the world. The silence of an empty house during business hours was oppressive in a way I had never anticipated. The relationship strain with my wife became apparent almost immediately. We had been married for 32 years, but most of that time had been structured around our separate work schedules and responsibilities. Suddenly I was home when she left for work and still home when she returned in the evening. We had to navigate 24-hour proximity for the first time since our early 20s, and neither of us was prepared for the adjustment this required. She would come home exhausted from her demanding job to find me restless and eager for conversation after a day of solitude. I wanted to share every detail of my day, which usually consisted of doctor appointments, cardiac rehabilitation sessions, and hours of unproductive time. She needed space to decompress, but I needed connection and stimulation. We were both trying to meet needs that had previously been satisfied through our work lives. My former colleagues made initial efforts to stay in touch, but those relationships faded quickly once I was no longer part of their daily work environment. The lunch invitations became less frequent, and the phone calls about business developments eventually stopped altogether. I realized that many of the relationships I had considered friendships were actually workplace convenience connections that could not survive outside the office context. The social isolation was particularly acute during normal business hours. Everyone I knew was working while I was learning to fill endless empty hours. I tried going to shopping centers and coffee shops, but being surrounded by other retired people during the day made me feel like I'd been exiled to some kind of waiting room for the end of productive life. My attempts to maintain some connection to my former work life were met with polite but clear boundaries. My replacement was chosen and trained without my input. Projects I had initiated were completed or cancelled without consulting me. The company moved forward seamlessly, as if my 35 years of contribution had never happened. This was perhaps the most crushing realization of all. I was entirely replaceable. The physical limitations imposed by my cardiac condition affected every aspect of my retirement plans. The golf I had planned to play regularly was restricted due to the stress it placed on my heart. The travel my wife and I had discussed was complicated by medication schedules and the need for access to cardiac specialists. Even simple activities like yard work or home maintenance projects had to be approached with caution and frequent rest breaks. By the third month of my forced retirement, I was sinking into a depression that felt as dangerous as the heart attack itself. I had lost my identity, my social connections, my sense of purpose, and my confidence in my physical capabilities, all at the same time. The retirement I had spent 13 years planning and anticipating had become a daily struggle, just to find reasons to get out of bed. Ask yourself this question. Are you prepared for retirement to arrive differently than you planned? Because all the financial preparation in the world cannot protect you from the emotional and psychological challenges of losing your work identity. Overnight, during my fourth month of forced retirement, the depression had become so overwhelming that my wife insisted I seek professional help. That decision led me to a therapist who specialized in life transitions, and more importantly, it forced me to confront 6 harsh truths about retirement that no amount of financial planning had prepared me for. These realizations came gradually, painfully, but ultimately became the foundation for rebuilding my life in a way that actually worked. The first truth hit me during a conversation with another patient in cardiac rehabilitation. This man had everything I thought I needed for retirement happiness. He was worth several $1 million, owned multiple properties, and had sufficient passive income to live lavishly for the rest of his life. Yet he sat in that rehabilitation center looking as lost and miserable as I felt. We started talking during our exercise sessions, and he confided that despite his wealth, he felt completely empty and purposeless. He told me that for the first year of his retirement, he had bought expensive toys and taken luxury vacations, thinking that spending money would fill the void left by his career. But no amount of material consumption could replace the sense of contribution and achievement that work had provided. He had discovered what I was learning. Money alone will not buy happiness in retirement. Money provides security and options, but it cannot provide meaning or identity or a reason to get up in the morning. This conversation forced me to examine my own relationship with money and retirement happiness. I had always assumed that reaching my financial targets would automatically translate into life satisfaction. I had never considered that the absence of financial stress might reveal deeper needs for purpose and contribution that money cannot address. We both had the savings to live comfortably, but we had lost our sense of worth and relevance in the world. The second harsh truth became apparent during my ongoing medical treatment. My cardiologist was brutally honest about what I could expect as I aged. The heart damage I had sustained was permanent. My energy levels would never return to what they had been in my 40s and early 50s. I would be dependent on medications for the rest of my life, and I needed to plan for increasing physical limitations as I got older. This was devastating, because all my retirement fantasies had assumed perfect health and unlimited energy. I had pictured myself hiking, traveling extensively, and maintaining an active lifestyle well into my 70s and 80s. Instead, I was learning to manage my activities around medication schedules, energy levels, and physical restrictions. I had to grieve the active retirement I had imagined and learn to plan around the reality of declining health. The conversations with my medical team taught me that health decline in retirement is not a possibility you can avoid with good planning. It is an inevitability you must accept and prepare for. Every retirement plan needs to account for increasing medical costs, decreasing physical capabilities, and the potential need for care assistance. These are not pessimistic assumptions. They are realistic preparations for the aging process. The third truth emerged during my sessions with my therapist, who helped me understand the depth of my identity crisis. For 35 years, I had been Jason, the successful executive. My business card, my office, my title, and my professional responsibilities had defined who I was, not just what I did for work. When the heart attack forced my retirement, I lost more than my job. I lost myself. The depression I was experiencing was not just sadness about being sick or worried about money. It was the profound disorientation of not knowing who I was without my professional identity. I had never developed interests or relationships or sources of self-worth that existed independently from my career. When work disappeared, there was nothing left to anchor my sense of self. My therapist explained that this identity loss is one of the most common and devastating aspects of retirement, especially for people who have been highly engaged in demanding careers. The transition requires rebuilding your entire sense of self around new roles and activities and relationships. This process takes time and intentional effort, and it cannot be rushed or skipped, regardless of how well you have prepared financially. The fourth truth became apparent as my forced retirement put unprecedented strain on my marriage and other relationships. My wife and I had been married for over 30 years, but we had never spent significant time together outside the context of our busy work schedules and shared parenting responsibilities. Suddenly, being together 24 hours a day revealed that we needed to learn how to be married again, not just cohabitate between work commitments. We had difficult conversations about how our relationship dynamics needed to change. She was still working full-time and coming home to find me desperately needing social interaction after long, lonely days. I was expecting her to meet emotional and social needs that had previously been satisfied through my work relationships. We both had to acknowledge that retirement changes marriages in ways that require conscious adjustment and sometimes professional guidance. My friendships also shifted dramatically. The colleagues I had considered close friends gradually stopped including me in their work-related social activities. I discovered that many of my relationships had been based on shared professional experiences rather than deeper personal connections. Some friendships survived the transition, but many did not, and I had to accept that retirement would require building new social connections based on my current reality, rather than my former status. The relationships with my adult son and daughter also changed as they struggled to understand their father's sudden vulnerability and dependence. They were used to seeing me as the strong, successful provider who had everything under control. My heart attack and subsequent depression forced them to confront my mortality and limitations in ways that made everyone uncomfortable. Look inside your own heart right now and consider how your retirement might affect the people closest to you. Are you preparing them for the changes that will come? Or are you assuming that your relationships will seamlessly adapt to your new circumstances? The fifth truth revealed itself during my darkest period, about 6 months into my forced retirement. I had fallen into a routine that revolved around daytime television and mindless internet browsing. By 10 a.m., I would already be on my third cup of coffee, sitting in my recliner, flipping through channels with no real interest in anything I was watching. The boredom was not just uncomfortable, it was soul-crushing in a way I had never imagined possible. I remember one particular Tuesday morning when I realized I had been watching the same morning talk show for 3 hours straight, absorbing absolutely nothing, just letting the noise fill the oppressive silence of my empty house. When my neighbor knocked on the door to check on me, he found me still in my pajamas at 2 in the afternoon. He looked at me with genuine concern and said, "Jason, you look completely lost." That observation hit me harder than any medical diagnosis. The depression that came from having nothing meaningful to do was unlike anything I had experienced during my most stressful work periods. At least When I was overwhelmed with corporate responsibilities, I felt important and needed. Now, I had all the time in the world and absolutely no idea how to use it productively. Every day stretched endlessly ahead of me with no structure, no deadlines, no purpose, and no sense that anything I did actually mattered. My wife would come home from her demanding job to find me exactly where she had left me that morning. I could see the worry and disappointment in her eyes as she realized that I had spent another entire day accomplishing nothing and contributing nothing to our household or our relationship. The guilt from this realization only deepened my depression and made me even less motivated to change my situation. The breakthrough came when my wife practically dragged me to meet with a volunteer coordinator at our local Habitat for Humanity chapter. She had reached the point where she was genuinely afraid for my mental health and was willing to try anything to help me find purpose again. I was resistant and embarrassed about my current state, but she insisted that I needed to get out of the house and connect with something larger than my own problems. The volunteer coordinator, was a woman who had worked with many retirees struggling with similar transitions. She did not judge my depression or treat my previous corporate success as particularly relevant to volunteer work. Instead, she asked me about what kind of contribution I wanted to make with the years I had remaining. That question forced me to think beyond my own comfort and convenience. For the first time in months, she introduced me to a family whose home we would be helping to build. Meeting them and hearing their story gave me the first glimpse of purpose I had felt since my heart attack. Here were people who needed help that I could provide, not because of my professional expertise or financial resources, but because I had time and physical capability to contribute to something meaningful. The physical work of home construction had to be adapted to my cardiac limitations, but the sense of accomplishment from contributing to something tangible and important was immediate and powerful. After months of feeling useless and invisible, I was once again part of a team working toward a shared goal. The difference was that this goal involved helping families rather than maximizing corporate profits. This experience taught me that retirement is not a permanent vacation, because permanent vacations become meaningless and oppressive. Human beings need purpose and contribution, and the sense that their efforts matter to someone beyond themselves. The challenge of retirement is not figuring out how to stay busy, but discovering how to remain useful and connected to something larger than your own comfort. The sixth and final truth emerged as I began to process my own mortality following the heart attack. Lying in that hospital bed with machines monitoring my damaged heart had forced me to calculate how many productive years I might have remaining. The math was sobering and created a strange paradox. I suddenly had acute awareness that my time was limited, while simultaneously having more free time than I knew how to handle productively. Every day felt both urgent and empty. I would wake up knowing that each day was precious because I might not have as many as I had always assumed, but then struggle to fill those days with anything that felt meaningful or important. The pressure to make every moment count was overwhelming when I had lost all sense of what actually counted. My therapist helped me understand that this time paradox is common among retirees, especially those who have faced health crises. The solution was not to pack every moment with frantic activity, but to be more intentional about how I chose to spend my time. Quality became more important than quantity, and meaning became more important than productivity. Learning to manage time in retirement required completely different skills than managing time during my corporate career. Instead of maximizing efficiency and output, I needed to focus on creating days that felt satisfying and purposeful, even when they were not particularly productive in measurable ways. The acceptance of these 6 harsh truths was not immediate or easy. I had to grieve the retirement fantasy I had nurtured for 13 years before I could embrace the reality I was actually living. Fighting against these truths had been exhausting and futile. Accepting them became the foundation for building a retirement that was not what I had planned, but was genuinely satisfying in ways I had never anticipated. Today, 5 years after that heart attack changed everything, I can honestly say that this is not the retirement I planned, but it has become the life I needed. My health is stable, my marriage is stronger, my days have structure and purpose, and I have found peace with the limitations and realities of this phase of life. So I'm asking you, just as someone who learned these lessons the hard way, will you accept these truths and plan accordingly? Or will you need your own wake-up call to understand what retirement really requires?